The sun hung low and red over the desert as Ethan Cole rode through the wasteland alone. Dust clung to his boots. His hat brim cast a shadow over his hardened face, and his horse's steps echoed softly in the dry silence. He had been riding for days, following a trail that existed more in memory than in truth. His destination lay somewhere beyond the hills, Apache land. The same land where his younger brother had been killed years ago. Ethan had once promised his dying mother he would not go chasing ghosts, that he would leave revenge to God. But grief has its own rules, and the pain in his chest had never faded. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his brother's smile vanish into gunfire and dust. That memory had followed him like a shadow until it turned into his reason for living. Now he was riding not just for vengeance but for closure, though he didn't yet know which one he'd find. The desert stretched endless before him. The heat shimmered in waves and the wind carried whispers, some from coyotes, some from his thoughts. Once he had been a scout for the cavalry, good with maps and reading tracks. But now his compass pointed only toward revenge. He crossed dry creeks, burnt grass, and old battlegrounds where bones slept beneath the sand. He passed a rusted rifle half buried near a mesquite tree, a reminder that no one ever truly left this land untouched. That night, he made camp under a cluster of rocks, his fire small and careful. He didn't want to draw attention, though deep down he hoped the Apaches would come. Maybe they'd lead him to the one he blamed. The stars stretched across the sky like cold silver. Ethan removed his hat, stared into the fire, and remembered his brother's voice saying, "Don't let hate eat you alive, Ethan." He had laughed then, but now the words felt like a warning. As he sipped his last bit of water, he noticed tracks near his camp, barefoot marks, light and careful. Someone had been watching him. His hand went to his revolver, but there was no movement, no sound beyond the wind. Still, he didn't sleep much that night. The land itself seemed to be watching him, testing his reason for coming. By dawn, the world was painted gold and quiet. He mounted his horse and rode toward the red cliffs in the distance. His map said there had once been an Apache settlement near Painted Rock Canyon. Maybe he'd find what he was looking for there. The air grew cooler as he rode deeper into the canyon, its walls rising like ancient guards. He could almost feel eyes on him from above. He stopped near a stream, letting his horse drink. The silence was too perfect. That's when he saw it, an arrow lodged in a nearby tree. Fresh. The shaft still quivered slightly as if it had been fired moments ago. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. He pulled his rifle from the saddle and scanned the ridge. Nothing moved. The desert had a way of hiding life behind stillness. He pressed forward, keeping one hand near his weapon. His mind drifted back to the night of his brother's death. A small ranch near the border, smoke filling the sky, the sound of war cries and gunfire. The neighbors had said it was an Apache raid, but some part of Ethan had always doubted it. The bodies had been left untouched, the cattle taken, but certain things hadn't made sense, the footprints, the way the fire was set. But reason had never quieted pain, and so he had chosen the story that gave his heart a target. By noon, the canyon opened into a wide basin. He saw the remains of an old camp, ashes, a broken wagon wheel, a torn blanket half buried in sand. He dismounted, kneeling beside the ashes. They were cold, weeks old, maybe months, but near them lay something newer, a woman's bracelet made of bone beads. It was small, delicate, not the kind of thing a raider would leave behind. Ethan picked it up, frowning. It wasn't what he expected to find on a path of revenge. He stood up and looked around, feeling the strange quiet again. That's when a sound broke the silence, a horse's snort followed by the creak of a bowstring. Ethan turned sharply, rifle half raised, but it was too late. From the rocks above, shadows moved. 5 Apache riders appeared, their faces painted, bows drawn. His heart pounded, but he didn't reach for his gun. There were too many of them, and he wasn't ready to die. Not yet. One of them dismounted and approached. It was a woman. She wore a deerskin dress and silver ornaments in her dark hair. Her gaze was calm but sharp, her eyes deep and unreadable. Ethan had seen warriors before, but something in her look made him hesitate. She studied him for a long moment before speaking a few words in English. "Why you come here?" Her voice was steady, her tone not angry but curious. Ethan swallowed, trying to find words. "I'm just passing through," he lied. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She didn't believe him. With a small gesture, she ordered 2 of her men to take his rifle. They tied his hands and led him toward the canyon's deeper trails. As they moved, Ethan glanced at the woman again. She rode ahead, silent and graceful, her braid moving with the rhythm of her horse. Something about her presence unsettled him. Not fear, but a strange respect. He had expected hatred, maybe violence. Instead, there was control. Dignity. By evening, they reached a small Apache camp hidden among the cliffs. Fires burned low, children played near the stream, and elders sat in quiet circles. This wasn't the savage camp he had imagined. It was a village, wounded, yes, but alive. When the riders brought him in, no one shouted or attacked. They only watched with tired, guarded eyes. Ethan was tied near a pole outside one of the huts. The woman approached again, holding a clay bowl of water. She handed it to him. "Drink," she said simply. He hesitated, then nodded and drank. The cool water felt like mercy. She turned to leave, but he found his voice. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. She looked back for a moment, her face lit by the fire's glow. "Nayeli," she said, "daughter of Taza Grey Wolf." Then she walked away. Ethan leaned back against the pole, staring into the night sky. For the first time in years, his anger felt uncertain. The faces around him weren't enemies, they were people rebuilding, surviving. And the woman named Nayeli had eyes that saw more than hatred could hide. He didn't know it yet, but this night would be the first step toward something far greater than revenge. He closed his eyes, listening to the sound of drums echoing softly through the canyon. Somewhere deep inside, the fire that had driven him for years flickered just a little, and a strange calm began to grow where anger used to live. The night passed slowly, and Ethan didn't sleep. He watched the Apache camp under the dim glow of the fires. He could hear quiet voices, the cry of a baby somewhere, and the soft beat of a drum. These were not the wild raiders he had imagined. They were families, worn, careful, and alert. A boy walked by with a wooden toy horse in his hand, his laughter echoing through the night. Ethan looked down, feeling a weight in his chest that had nothing to do with the ropes around his wrists. By morning, the sun rose behind the cliffs, turning the sky orange. Two Apache men untied him and motioned for him to walk. He didn't resist. They took him to the largest tent in the camp. Inside sat a tall man with silver strands in his black hair, Chief Taza Grey Wolf. His face was calm, his eyes strong but tired. Ethan recognized him from old army reports, stories told around forts and saloons. They had painted Taza as a fierce, heartless leader, but the man before him looked more like someone who had seen too much loss. Nayeli stood beside her father, holding a small clay bowl. When she saw Ethan, her expression stayed unreadable. She spoke something in her native tongue, and her father nodded. Then in slow English, the chief said, "You came far. Why?" Ethan didn't answer right away. His mouth was dry. "Just traveling," he muttered. Taza's eyes narrowed. "Lies taste bitter," he said quietly. "Your heart brings fire." Ethan looked away. He wanted to argue, but the truth sat heavy inside him. Nayeli stepped forward and said something softly to her father. The chief listened, then spoke again. "You stay alive for now, you eat. Then we talk again." Ethan was led away, untied, and given a piece of bread and dried meat. He ate slowly, his eyes following Nayeli as she helped an old woman near a fire. Her movements were graceful but strong. Children followed her like small shadows, and she smiled at them with a warmth that didn't match the hard world they lived in. Ethan tried to understand why someone like her would even speak to a man like him. Later that day, he was told to follow two young warriors to fetch water from a nearby stream. They didn't trust him with a weapon, only gave him a small bucket. The trail to the stream cut through tall rocks. The air smelled of wet earth and cedar. For a brief moment, he felt peace, but it didn't last long. As they filled the buckets, one of the warriors suddenly froze. He gestured for silence. Ethan listened and heard the faint sound of horses in the distance. Not Apaches. The rhythm was wrong. The warriors crouched behind rocks. Ethan followed their lead and saw riders on the ridge. 4 men, white men carrying rifles, outlaws. They were scouting the canyon below, whispering to each other. One of them held a crumpled map. Ethan's stomach tightened. He recognized that face. The scar across the jaw, the way he sat in the saddle. It was Luke Harlan, the man who had led the raid that killed his brother. The sight hit Ethan like a hammer. Rage burned through him again, fierce and cold. The outlaws didn't see them. They rode off toward the east, their voices fading with the wind. The Apache warriors waited until they were gone, then hurried back to camp. Ethan followed silently, his thoughts spinning. Why were those men here? Why near this village? Then he realized, Harlan must be planning another raid, maybe to steal supplies or start another war between settlers and Apaches. When they reached camp, the warriors reported what they'd seen. The chief listened, his face hardening. Nayeli looked at Ethan, her eyes sharp. You know those men? She asked. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. One of them killed my brother. A quiet settled over the camp. Taza studied him, saying nothing for a long moment. Finally he spoke. Then you know the truth. Not Apache hands. White men pretending to be us. They burn, they steal, they make war. We bury the blame. Ethan felt the world tilt under his feet. The hatred he'd carried for years now felt like a cruel trick. He remembered the broken tracks, the strange marks near his brother's ranch. The signs had been there all along. He just hadn't wanted to see them. That night he sat near the fire with Nayeli. She was weaving a basket, her fingers moving calmly. Why didn't you tell the soldiers? Ethan asked. They don't listen, she said softly. They only see our faces, not our hearts. If we fight back, they call us killers. If we stay silent, they take our land. She looked at him then. You came to hate us. Now you see. Hate blinds both sides. Ethan had no answer. He stared into the flames, hearing the laughter of his brother again, remembering the promise he broke. The next morning, he asked the chief to let him go. I need to find those men, he said. They'll come back. You have to move your people. Taza's eyes narrowed slightly. You want to fight them? Yes, Ethan said. But not for revenge this time. For what's right. The chief nodded slowly. You will have help. He gestured toward Nayeli. My daughter knows their trails. She goes with you. Ethan was caught off guard. With me? That's dangerous. Nayeli smiled faintly. Danger walks with everyone here. By midday they were riding out together. Ethan had his rifle back and Nayeli carried a bow across her back. The land around them shimmered with heat. They rode through dry ravines and mesquite trees, following the tracks of the outlaws. Occasionally they found signs, ashes, a broken horseshoe, the mark of boot heels instead of moccasins. They stopped at sunset on a ridge overlooking the valley. Ethan used his spyglass and spotted movement, 4 tents, horses, and men sitting by a fire. It was Harlan's gang. He could hear their laughter even from a distance. They planned something, Nayeli said quietly. Yes, Ethan replied, lowering the glass. They'll hit your village at dawn. She looked at him with steady eyes. Then we stopped them before the sun rises. They made a small camp hidden in the rocks. As darkness fell, Ethan sat with his rifle across his knees. Nayeli prepared her arrows and tied her hair back. The night air was cool, filled with the hum of crickets. For a moment the world felt calm. Ethan looked at her. Why help me? I came here as your enemy. She didn't look up from her bow. Because hate takes life from both sides, she said softly. My father says even a wounded heart can still find its way back to the light. He watched her in silence. Her words felt simple but true. He thought of all the wasted years he spent feeding anger. Maybe this journey wasn't about revenge after all. Maybe it was about finding his own soul again. When the moon climbed high, they moved quietly toward the outlaw camp. The fire below flickered between the tents. Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. He and Nayeli crawled through the brush, their movements soundless. Then, as if fate wanted to test him, he heard Harlan's voice, clear and cruel. Tomorrow we burn the Apache camp, Harlan was saying. The soldiers will believe they started it again. We'll take the gold, ride south, and let them kill each other off. Ethan clenched his fists. Every word cut like a knife. He wanted to rush in, to end it there, but Nayeli's hand touched his arm, steadying him. Not now, she whispered. Wait for the dawn, he nodded. They slipped back to their hiding place and waited in silence. The first light of morning painted the horizon pink and gold. In those quiet hours, Ethan realized something had changed in him. The rage was still there, but it no longer controlled him. He looked at Nayeli and felt a strange peace, a connection that didn't need words. The sky turned pale as the first light touched the canyon. The morning air felt heavy with silence, like the world was holding its breath. Ethan and Nayeli were hidden behind a rocky ridge watching the outlaw camp below. The men were still half asleep, their horses tied loosely, rifles leaning against the fire pit. Ethan gripped his rifle, his jaw tight. For years he had dreamed of this moment, facing the men who destroyed his family. But now it felt different. His anger no longer burned wild. It was steady, cold, and clear. Nayeli crouched beside him, her bow ready. She looked calm, her eyes sharp as she studied the camp. 4 men, she whispered. 1 keeps guard near the horses. Ethan nodded. The one with the scar, that's Luke Harlan. He's the leader, she followed his gaze. You know him? Too well, Ethan said softly. He killed my brother and made me blame your people. Nayeli looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, Then today, you take truth, not revenge. Her words settled deep in his chest. For the first time, Ethan understood how much he had changed since meeting her. He wasn't here to feed his hate anymore. He was here to stop men who thrived on it. When the outlaws began packing their gear, Ethan gave Nayeli a signal. She knocked an arrow, took a deep breath, and released. The arrow flew straight, hitting the ground beside the guard's foot. The man jumped back in surprise, shouting a warning. Before the others could react, Ethan fired a shot into the air. The noise sent the outlaws scrambling for cover. Horses neighed and broke loose, dust rising around them. Ethan shouted, Harlan!
I know what you're planning.
Harlan ducked behind a wagon wheel, aiming his pistol toward the ridge. That voice, he snarled. Cole? You're supposed to be dead. Not yet, Ethan called back. But you'll answer for what you did. Gunfire cracked across the valley. Nayeli moved fast, her arrows flying with quiet precision. She struck one man's rifle hand, another's shoulder. Ethan fired carefully, never wasting a bullet. The fight was short but fierce. When the dust settled, 2 men were wounded. 1 dead, and Harlan was crawling toward his gun. Ethan stepped down from the rocks, walking slowly toward him. Nayeli followed, her bow still ready. Harlan's eyes were wild as he looked up. You think killing me fixes anything? He spat. Ethan stopped, breathing hard. No, he said quietly. But stopping you will. He aimed his rifle, then hesitated. The hatred that had once driven him now felt like a shadow behind him. For a moment he saw his brother's face, not angry but sad. Ethan lowered the gun. You're going to stand trial, he said. You'll face justice, Harlan laughed, a broken sound. Justice? Out here? But before he could reach his weapon again, Nayeli stepped forward and kicked it away. She said something in her language that made Harlan flinch. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned with quiet power. Ethan tied Harlan's hands and led him toward the horses. We take him to your camp, he said. Your father should know who started this war. They rode back through the canyon. The sun climbed higher, turning the rocks golden. Ethan felt the weight of years lifting off his shoulders. He wasn't sure if he was forgiven yet, but he had taken the first step. Nayeli rode beside him, silent, her braid moving with the wind. When they reached the village, the people gathered quickly. Taza Grey Wolf stood tall at the center, his eyes dark with concern. When he saw Harlan tied and bleeding, his expression hardened. Ethan dismounted and faced him. This man led the attacks, he said. He made it look like your people were guilty. A murmur ran through the crowd. The chief looked at Harlan, then at Ethan. You bring proof? Ethan reached into Harlan's coat and pulled out the crumpled map. Their plan was written here. They marked your village. He handed it over. Taza studied it carefully, then nodded once. Truth shows itself, he said quietly. Your brother died by lies, not by my people. Ethan's throat tightened. The words hit harder than any bullet. I know, he said, and I'm sorry for what I believed. The chief placed a hand on his shoulder. A man who admits his wrong becomes stronger than his hate. The camp buzzed with relief and anger. Some of the warriors wanted to execute Harlan on the spot, but Taza raised his hand. No, he said firmly. We show mercy. His kind uses hate to make war. We will not feed that fire, Harlan sneered. You think letting me live makes you better? Taza looked at him calmly. It makes us human. Nayeli stepped closer to her father. What will we do now? We prepare, Taza said. If more men come, we show them we seek peace, not blood. He turned to Ethan. You brought this truth. You may stay or go, but you have earned our trust. Ethan nodded slowly. I'll stay for now, until it's safe. Over the next days, he helped rebuild fences, gather wood, and hunt for food. The villagers watched him with curiosity, but slowly, their suspicion faded. Children followed him when he worked, asking questions about his horse, his gun, his stories. He answered with a quiet smile. Every evening, he sat near the fire with Nayeli. Sometimes they talked about her people's traditions, other times about the world beyond the canyon. She told him stories about the stars, how they were the eyes of ancestors watching over the living. He listened, feeling peace for the first time in years. One night after the camp had fallen silent, Ethan walked to the edge of the stream. The moon shimmered on the water. He took out the bone bracelet he had found near the old camp. It was hers, he had realized that long ago. He held it out. "This belongs to you." Naomi looked at the bracelet, then at him. "You keep it," she said softly. "It found you for a reason." Ethan hesitated. "And what reason is that?" She smiled faintly. "So you remember what truth looks like." Her words lingered in the cool night air. Ethan looked up at the stars and felt something shift deep inside him. The pain that had once ruled him was fading, replaced by something gentler. Respect, gratitude, and maybe something more. Days passed, and the land began to heal. The soldiers who once patrolled near the border didn't return. The war rumors faded. Harlan was taken by a passing lawman to face trial in the nearest town. Before he left, he spat on the ground and muttered curses, but Ethan didn't react. The man's power was gone. As the camp settled back into its rhythm, Ethan started helping Taza teach young men how to track and read the land. The chief said, "A man who knows both worlds can build peace between them." Ethan took those words to heart. Sometimes, when the wind blew softly across the canyon, Ethan could hear distant drums and the sound of laughter. He'd glance toward Nayeli's tent and see her smiling with the children, her face glowing in the firelight. She was no longer just the woman who spared his life. She had become the reason he began to live again. But deep down, Ethan knew peace was fragile. The world outside the canyon still burned with mistrust. He couldn't stay forever, but leaving would not be easy. He had come here as an enemy and found something he never expected: truth, forgiveness, and a woman whose kindness had changed his heart. That night, as the fire crackled low, Nayeli sat beside him. "You think you will leave soon?" she asked quietly. He looked at the flames. "Maybe, but I'll never forget this place." "Or you," she smiled sadly. "The wind will carry your name." "That is enough." Ethan nodded, feeling the ache of something that wasn't hate anymore. It was longing, the kind that stays even after you ride away. The next morning, as the sun rose over the canyon, he knew a new story was beginning, not one written in anger, but in peace. And somewhere in that silence between two hearts, he found the part of himself he thought he had lost forever. The night was calm, but the air felt heavy, as if the land itself knew something was coming. The Apache camp lay under the open sky, fires burning low, horses tied close. Ethan sat near the edge of the village, cleaning his rifle. The stars glimmered above, sharp and cold, reminding him of all the nights he had once spent alone, searching for revenge. Now, he was guarding something different. People he had learned to respect, lives he had promised to protect. Across the firelight, Nayeli moved quietly, helping an old woman grind corn. Her calmness never failed to amaze him. Even knowing the danger that might come with dawn, she carried herself with steady strength. When she caught Ethan looking at her, she smiled faintly. "You're awake again," she said softly. "Hard to sleep when trouble's coming," he replied. She walked closer, her voice calm. "You think they will come tonight?" Ethan nodded. "Harlan's men will try again. The soldiers might even follow after, thinking your people attacked first. We have to be ready for both." The chief, Taza Grey Wolf, approached then, his tall frame outlined by the firelight. "Our scouts saw riders far from the canyon," he said. "Maybe 30. They move with the wind, but hide like wolves." Ethan stood. "Then it's them. They'll come before sunrise." Taza looked at him with quiet pride. "You will fight beside us?" Ethan nodded without hesitation. "You saved my life. I won't run while yours are in danger." The chief placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then you are one of us tonight." Preparations began. Warriors checked their bows and rifles. The women moved the children and elders to the far side of the canyon, where caves offered shelter. Ethan worked with the men to dig shallow trenches and set traps along the ridge. Every noise, every shadow seemed louder in the dark. When all was ready, he walked to where Nayeli stood watching the horizon. The moonlight touched her face, soft but strong. "You should be with the others," he said quietly. She shook her head. "I will not hide. My people need me here." He wanted to argue but didn't. Instead, he said, "Stay close to the firelight. Promise me that." "I promise," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The hours crawled by. The night deepened and the wind began to shift. Ethan listened carefully. Then faintly he heard it, the distant thud of hooves. His grip tightened on his rifle. "They're coming," he murmured. The warriors moved into their positions, silent as stone. The chief raised his hand, signaling for calm. Ethan knelt behind a log, eyes fixed on the dark ridge beyond the camp. The first glimmer of dawn began to touch the sky when the attack came. Gunfire shattered the silence. Muzzle flashes lit the canyon like lightning. Bullets tore through the dust and smoke. Horses screamed. The outlaws charged with wild shouts, their rifles blazing. Ethan fired back, his shots sharp and precise. The Apache warriors moved like shadows, using the rocks for cover, striking and vanishing. Arrows whistled through the air, hitting their marks with deadly accuracy. Amid the chaos, Ethan saw Nayeli helping a wounded man near the fire. She dragged him behind cover, her dress streaked with dust. A bullet tore through a clay pot beside her, spraying fragments, but she didn't flinch. "Stay down," Ethan shouted, running to cover her. She glanced at him, breathless but fierce. "Go, they need you at the ridge." He hesitated for a moment, then nodded and sprinted toward the north side, where gunfire roared loudest. The outlaws had pushed closer, using the rocks as shields. He spotted Harlan among them, barking orders. Ethan took aim. His finger rested on the trigger, but then he stopped. The same battle played again in his mind, the fire, his brother's screams, the endless cycle of hate. He took a slow breath, steadied his rifle, and fired, not to kill, but to disable. The shot struck Harlan's hand, sending his gun flying. The outlaw cursed and stumbled back, clutching his arm. His men hesitated, uncertain without their leader's command. The Apache warriors used that moment to surge forward. Within minutes, the fight began to turn. Smoke filled the air. Ethan reloaded, sweat and dust stinging his eyes. He saw Taza rallying his men, his deep voice steady even over the gunfire.
Hold the line.
The chief called. "The land stands with us." The words gave strength to everyone. Ethan felt it too, a strange sense of belonging, as if this land that once rejected him now accepted him as part of its story. When the last shots echoed away, only silence remained. The outlaws were defeated, some dead, some fleeing into the desert. Harlan was gone too, vanished into the rocks, leaving only a trail of blood. Ethan lowered his rifle and looked around. The camp was damaged but still standing. Smoke rose from burned tents. The wounded groaned softly, but there was also relief that they had survived. He found Nayeli kneeling beside a boy with an injured leg, wrapping it carefully with cloth. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes stayed calm. When she saw Ethan, she gave a tired smile. "It's over," she said. He nodded. "For now." She looked at him, her voice gentle. "You fought for us. My father will not forget." "I didn't do it for him," Ethan said quietly. "I did it for what's right." The chief approached them, leaning on his spear. "You fought with honor," he said. "You could have left, but you stayed. You are welcome in this land as long as you wish." Ethan looked at him with gratitude.
Thank you.
"But I think the land belongs to those who never left it." Taza smiled faintly. "Then may it remember your name." The following days were spent rebuilding. The villagers worked together to mend what was broken. Ethan helped carry wood, fix fences, and tend to the wounded. Nayeli moved among the people like light, her kindness giving everyone strength. Sometimes Ethan caught himself watching her, wondering what it would have been like if they had met in another world, another time. But this land was harsh. It demanded sacrifice. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan stood at the ridge where the battle had taken place. The ground was still scarred, but wildflowers had begun to bloom between the rocks. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Nayeli. "You're leaving," she said softly. He nodded.
The soldiers will come soon.
"They'll see the bodies and think another war started. I can speak for you. Maybe stop more blood from being spilled." She looked at him with sadness in her eyes. "You will go back to your people and forget us," he shook his head slowly. "No, I'll remember every face, every kindness, especially yours." Nayeli reached into her pouch and took out a small feather tied with a red thread. "Then take this. It means the wind knows your spirit." Ethan accepted it carefully, his voice low. "And if the wind brings me back?" Her smile was gentle. "Then the land will listen." They stood together in silence, the fading light turning the sky to gold. For a brief moment, neither spoke. There were no promises, no words big enough for what they felt, only a quiet understanding. that some meetings change a life forever, even if paths must part. When night came, Ethan saddled his horse. The camp gathered to see him off. Taza raised his hand in farewell. "Ride with peace, brother of the canyon." Ethan tipped his hat. "And you, Chief, guard them well." He turned to Nayeli one last time. Their eyes met, hers bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. Then, without another word, he rode into the desert, the sound of his horse's hooves fading with the wind. Behind him, the canyon stood still, holding the memory of fire, courage, and the beginning of something that would never fade. The morning sun was still low when Ethan rode out of the canyon. The wind followed him, carrying faint echoes of drums and the smell of smoke from the Apache camp. His horse's hooves beat a steady rhythm on the dry ground, each step taking him farther from the place that had changed him. He didn't look back at first, afraid that if he did, he might never leave. The feather Nayeli had given him hung from his saddle, swaying gently with the motion of the horse. It was the only thing he carried that truly mattered now. The journey back toward the settlements was long and quiet. Ethan passed the familiar landmarks, the dry riverbeds, the broken fences, the lonely trees standing like old guards. Once these lands had looked empty to him, just wilderness and danger. Now he saw life everywhere, the flight of hawks, the tracks of deer, the whisper of the wind that seemed to speak in a language he finally understood. At night, he camped under the stars, his small fire flickering against the darkness. He couldn't sleep much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Nayeli's face lit by the firelight, the calm strength in her eyes, the way she had stood beside him when the bullets flew. She had taught him something he'd forgotten long ago, that forgiveness could heal deeper wounds than hate ever could. When he reached the nearest border town, people stared. He was covered in dust, his clothes torn, his face marked by days of travel. Some recognized him as the ex-scout who had vanished into Apache land. They asked questions, but he said little. He went straight to the marshal's office and told him everything. The truth about Harlan, the fake raids, the plan to stir another war. The marshal listened with disbelief at first, then slowly nodded. "You sure about all this, Cole?" "I saw it myself," Ethan said, "and I've got proof." He placed the map and Harlan's written notes on the desk. The marshal studied them, then sighed. "We've been chasing ghosts, blaming the wrong people. Guess you just stopped a war, son." Ethan shook his head. "Not a war, just another lie." A few days later, Harlan was caught near the border by a patrol. Wounded and tired, he didn't fight back. When they brought him in, he gave Ethan a bitter smile. "You think you won?" He sneered. Ethan didn't answer. He only said, "I stopped you." "That's enough," Harlan laughed weakly. "You turned soft, Cole. That woman made you forget who you are." Ethan looked at him with calm eyes. "No," he said quietly. "She helped me remember." After giving his statement and ensuring the Apache people would be left in peace, Ethan refused the marshal's offer of a reward. He just wanted to disappear, to find somewhere quiet where his heart could rest. He bought a few supplies and rode north, following the open trail with no clear destination. Days turned into weeks. He passed ranches and river valleys, towns where laughter returned and roads where no one knew his name. He worked when he needed food, helped mend fences, broke horses, and slept under the stars. But no matter where he went, the memory of the canyon stayed with him. Sometimes when the wind blew a certain way, he swore he could hear the faint sound of drums or a woman's voice carried in the air, soft as a prayer. One evening, while camped near a river, Ethan took out the small feather Nayeli had given him. He ran his fingers over it gently. It had survived rain and wind, still bright as the day she'd tied it with red thread. He held it to his chest, staring at the setting sun. "You're still with me," he whispered. "I can feel it." That night, he dreamed. He saw her standing on the canyon ridge, the wind in her hair, the sky painted gold behind her. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. "Don't forget who you've become." When he woke, the world felt lighter. He knew then that love wasn't always about staying. Sometimes it was about carrying someone's spirit wherever you went. Months passed. Ethan settled near the mountains, building a small cabin by hand. The valley below was quiet and green, the kind of place where the heart could finally rest. He spent his days tending a small herd, fixing fences and watching the seasons change. Life was simple but peaceful. Sometimes travelers passed through and he'd offer them water or shelter for the night. They'd talk around the fire and often someone would mention the Apaches down south. They say there's peace now, one man told him. A new treaty. Their chief kept his word. Ethan smiled faintly. He's a good man, he said softly. The man nodded. They say his daughter's strong like him. Teaches the children, keeps the people together. Some call her the heart of the canyon. Ethan's hand stilled on his cup. The fire crackled quietly. He didn't ask more, he didn't need to. He just looked out at the night sky, feeling that same wind again carrying a piece of her across the miles. Years slipped by, gentle and uncounted. The hair around his temples turned gray, and his hands grew lined from work. But he was content. The ghosts that once haunted him were gone, replaced by quiet memories. He had lived long enough to see how truth could outlast lies, how peace could grow from the ashes of war. One spring morning, Ethan rode up the ridge above his cabin. The grass was green, wildflowers scattered like drops of color across the hills. He stopped his horse at the edge and looked toward the south, the direction of Apache land. The sun was warm, the sky endless blue. He reached into his coat and pulled out the feather. Time had faded it, but it was still beautiful. He smiled, his eyes soft with remembrance. You were right, Nayli, he said quietly. The wind never forgets. He tied the feather to a branch of the tallest tree on the ridge where it could dance in the breeze. Then he stood there for a long time, watching it sway. It felt like she was there, her spirit in the wind, her strength in the earth beneath his boots. When he finally turned to leave, he felt no sorrow. He had come to this land once for revenge and found love instead. He had learned that even in the harshest deserts, something pure could bloom if you let your heart heal. Back at his cabin, he lit a small fire and poured himself coffee. He sat by the window watching the sunset spill across the valley. The sky turned shades of orange and gold, just like the evenings in the canyon long ago. Sometimes the silence spoke to him. He'd hear laughter in the wind, the rustle of leaves that sounded like whispered words, and he'd smile knowing that somewhere, the woman he could never forget was still part of the world, living in every breeze, every heartbeat, every sunrise that painted the horizon. Years later, when travelers passed by that valley, they found the old cabin still standing, quiet and strong. They said the wind there had a strange softness to it, almost like a song. And on the ridge above, they saw a single weathered feather tied to a tree, fluttering gently in the wind. They didn't know whose it was or what story it carried, but those who stopped to listen swore they could feel something, a peace that came from love remembered, not lost. And so the tale of Ethan Cole and Nayeli lived on, whispered by the wind across the desert. It wasn't a story of war or revenge anymore. It was the story of two hearts that met in the fire of hate and turned it into light. For the rest of his days, Ethan carried her memory not as pain but as purpose. And every time the wind touched his face, he smiled, because he knew it was her, reminding him that even after goodbye, love never really ends.